got a background, fairly diverse background, including work on control and intelligent systems. And he's going to talk to us today about emergence in AI systems, and I'll leave Roel to tell the story. Okay, go ahead, Roel. Thanks.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. So yeah, my name is Roel Dobbe. I'm an assistant professor at the Faculty of Technology, Policy and Management at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. I've been here now for 2.5 years. Been back in Europe for 3 years. And as the faculty name says, we are doing work at the intersection of technology, policy, and management. My role here is to look at data-driven, algorithmic, and intelligent systems. And yeah, as was just mentioned, I have a background in control theory, systems and control. Originally also graduated from Delft. But I've also worked in industry for a while in between, looking at different challenges. So this is more than 10 years ago now. Challenges around the introduction of data analytics, of machine learning applications. And that was around the time that I started sort of getting a bit worried about organizations being able to really not just seize on the opportunities, but also address the issues that emerge when you start to rely on forms of automation. And that really, so this is in 2013, I ended up going back to academia and did a PhD in control and intelligent systems at Berkeley in California, where I slowly started to deepen my expertise in control systems, but I also started to weave in interdisciplinary questions and start to connect across the campus in Berkeley, where I founded an organization called GEES, which stands for Graduates in Engaged and Extended Scholarship in Computing and Engineering. And it was really meant to together sort of wrestle with the sort of implications of automation and the rise of AI or machine learning applications in all kinds of contexts. And fast forward now, I've done a postdoc at the AI Now Institute in New York, where we really started to dive into the policy issues and the societal issues around AI systems. And now I'm in a place where, the engineering work comes together with those policy and societal questions in a nice integral way. But it's also for me been a journey to sort of see how my systems engineering, control engineering background fits in with the more interdisciplinary approach to technology policy management. And a key aspect in that is the notion of emergence. And I've listed here a subtitle, a prerequisite for meaningful digital ethics, which was actually, I gave a version of this talk a month ago to the ethicists and philosophers in the department here, whom are, I think, also quite renowned for doing technology ethics, doing applied ethics. However, I think we are all struggling with the complexity of AI systems and addressing their implications. And one thing I saw is that for them, it's sometimes hard to sort of appreciate the more systems complexities in thinking about ethics. And my sense is that, well, I've also seen that in other places. So this talk sort of addresses that struggle, not just in other disciplines, also in my own journey. And it's in doing so, I also provide a bit of an overview of what I've done over the last years, and I highlight some of the work that my PhDs and master students have done. So let's dive into it. The central question I want to ask is, what does it take to achieve safe and responsible AI in practice, or you could say in situations where these systems are being used, that are being relied upon? And I don't want to go over lots of different ways in which these systems are not unsafe, and some things will come up in the presentation, but probably you've seen ways in which self-driving cars have led to new types of accidents, the way that welfare systems rely on AI or algorithmic systems and lead to new tragedies, like the childcare benefit scandal here in the Netherlands. and many more. So I don't want to spend too much time there, but I want to start with addressing the sort of reflexes, the responses that we've seen over the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years to new risks, but also new tangible harms and algorithmic harms, you could say. So we've seen, I described 3 different reflexes. So we have a more technological reflex where we see efforts from developers, from technical researchers, for instance, to try address biases in machine learning models and in data sets, or in AI safety, which is a community that sort of prides itself to see if we can safeguard systems by really turning the knobs of AI, of the sort of mathematics of AI, and I will come back to that. And this is a reflex that I think I see contributes to what I call the sociotechnical gap. I don't call it myself, but it's a well-known concept. Comes from the community of computer-supported cooperative work. Mark Ackerman, I think around 2000, wrote a paper about this, and it's the idea that technical fixes, technical solutions may actually widen the gap between what is socially desired and technically possible. And as a result, the ethical, legal, and social issues, they follow a push for technological solutions rather than forming a sort of a starting point for design and for thinking about the role of technology to begin with. Then we've also seen lots of ethics principles, ethics frameworks. And by the way, all these responses have their merit. I'm not claiming that they're wrong in any form. I'm just trying to sort of show how them being a reflex to a sort of new reality in which AI systems are ubiquitous, are really reshaping our practices, our processes, our institutions. And so in terms of ethics, what we see is there's lots of very valuable, lots of value to increasing ethical reflection in companies, in governments, in other organizations, in knowledge institutions, in universities. And I think really the rise of AI has also really helped to, for instance, here in Delft, to really raise the stakes of why ethics in our curricula are important. But at the same time, they have also formed a way of trying to sort of influence or dodge more stringent constraints and regulatory approaches. And so at the AI Now Institute in New York, where I was a postdoc at the time, this was in 2018, we researched what we then termed the accountability gap, where in short, what we mean with this is that ethics may be used as a way to ethics washing, or shopping, some have called it, may be used as a way to widen the gap between those who develop and profit from AI and those that are most likely to suffer the consequences of the negative effects. And so that's the second one. The third one is, I think, something that is really at the forefront of policymakers, at least here in the Netherlands and also elsewhere, which is the policy reflex. So we see that the European AI Act is now getting to its, I think, 3rd or 4th iteration and will be launched in the next couple of years. We see policy initiatives like algorithm registers, where algorithms that are used by organizations are listed and provide information to hopefully learn something more about what these algorithms do and what their impacts are. We see impact assessments. We see procurement conditions for AI systems and many more policy instruments. And part of our research in the beginning here in Delft has been focusing on understanding what kinds of instruments are being proposed and trying to assess their efficacy. And here there's another gap that we see emerging, which I've termed the safety gap, where the push for policy instruments, if we're not careful, may increase bureaucracy, especially around development. It may ask a lot from developers, while potentially missing the actual risk for citizens. And actually, one of the key insights, spoiler alert, in this research is that we've seen is that actually very well-meaning entrepreneurial civil servants that started these initiatives, really very much bottom up here in the Dutch context, across 13 different public organizations. They started it really from a strong intrinsic motivation to improve the way that the use of AI, the use of algorithms, contributes to serving citizens, but also preventing the harms of these systems. And of course, I already mentioned the childcare benefit scandal, which has been a huge blow for many. We've had tens of thousands of families that have been severely harmed by the scandal, in which algorithms played a central role. It was not just about algorithms, but it's very clear that the complex ways in which public services have been sort of rewired and reshaped through information architectures and coupling between different services and the role that algorithm plays in that is central, and we still don't fully understand it. And so we've seen a sort of shift from really trying to develop these policy instruments to aid citizens, to now a huge, very big program that is now also internalized by a new Ministry for Digital Affairs, where we're actually seeing that the citizen, or the perspective on the citizen, or potential subjects that may experience harm, has been sort of pushed to the side, and it's a lot more internal. And maybe that is needed for these organizations to sort of professionalize. But I think it is an interesting sort of part of this reflects that if we are not careful, we end up, again, creating more bureaucracy, but maybe not the kind of bureaucracy that prevents a new scandal. So that really sets this sets the motivation for, I think, most of the work that I do here at Delft. In short, mind the gap, or maybe address the gap, to bring in a quintessential English or British. I don't know if you also see I've never taken the tube in Scotland, anywhere in Scotland, so I don't know if this is just a London image. But anyways, this is the central motivation, and so with that comes an ambition to see how we can integrate different perspectives. It's already naturally occurring. More and more scholars and also these policy entrepreneurs that I mentioned are seeing that they have to that we need to sort of complement and see how different instruments, different approaches overlap and synergize. And it's like I said earlier, the Technology Policy and Management Department is a great way, where we have ethicists, we have people in governance and institutional design, and people are a bit more in engineering and design like me, but that are sort of receptive or sort of trying to build bridges across the design of AI systems and the policy challenges. And so, with that comes a way to, let me see if I can. Here it is. A mission to break down the gap. So the gap, and one important gap is the gap between developers on the one end, introducing new artifacts, new algorithmic systems, increasing the complexity of our digital landscape, whether that is in public services or in other domains. And the people that are sometimes ultimately responsible for these processes, like doctors or civil servants, but of course also the people that are subject to it. The way we do that is by developing what we call situated and integrative approaches. So really trying to not just see what we here in this faculty can do, but also studying practices of developers or working with colleagues in computer science and in other engineering fields, to see how we can also motivate them to situate their research and their development in the context that they want to contribute to, but also thinking about how new developments integrate in existing legacy organizations, legacy practices and knowledge and infrastructures. And there's 4 types of research so far that we've, broadly speaking, that we've done. to address this central question that I showed earlier. And these are empirical work. So we also see in the literature there's really a shortage of empirical work that tries to understand these practices of developing and governing, but also the way that now people are thinking about reshaping policies and governance approaches to AI systems to gain some form of control over AI systems. I've done some work on more historical work on sort of what do we already know about these kinds of systems. So one of the papers I think that was also listed in the invitation for today is about system safety, which is a discipline that has developed over the last, I think, 70 years since the 50s. And during the 80s and 90s and beyond has learned a lot about the role of software, the role of automation, and how to look at what is needed, what does it take to achieve safe and responsible automation in practice. So this paper basically sort of pulls up these lessons again. It honors the work by Nancy Leveson, which is a pioneer in system safety, but it also tries to situate these lessons in for different kinds of cases today. And from working on that paper has then also really helped to do more, and the empirical work has helped to do more conceptual work. So in the end, we do want to help change practices and see how we can build safer systems, more responsible systems. So we're now currently, I think we're really doing a lot of work there conceptually. We have a few PhDs that are in that phase of their PhD, so to speak, and had some great master's theses that have started to do this, which I'll share in a moment. And from there, and this is really a bit more the future work, but we've already been able to influence or inform some of the policy debates around algorithmic governance here in the Netherlands. And hopefully soon we'll see some of the frameworks also being more evaluated. And some of them are now used in practice, and we can evaluate them and see what their impact is. And so with these gaps that I mentioned before, also come a number of central challenges. These don't necessarily refer to the gaps that are listed above, but really a key ambition is to acknowledge that AI systems reshape public infrastructure. So they reshape the way that we implement laws, that we serve citizens, or that we structure road traffic with self-driving cars, for instance. And that means that we have to, eventually also reshape democratic input, control, and feedback mechanisms to anticipate, prevent, and respond to the intrinsic sources of hazards and harm that come with these dependencies. And as I mentioned before, we've been working with a consortium of 13 different public organizations, and these were the policy instruments. I already mentioned some of them. These were the 4 that we actually. Is that right? No, these are actually not exactly the ones that we studied. These are ones that are now currently most prominently developed. But what we did was, we looked at, we interviewed and we observed a lot of the meetings and gatherings of the participants, and from there we sort of identified, we matched the ideas and the emerging ideas and instruments and practices with what we know about sociotechnical systems and the complexities that come with that, and what it takes to govern complex algorithmic or automation systems. And my PhD student Sam Naus, which I will actually list some of his work. I think it's on the slide. That's right. Sam Naus, he was able to sort of capture really important insights, and he was also asked by this consortium to sort of look a little bit ahead, but because what you often see is that policy entrepreneurs, they got a year to think about these instruments, to maybe scale them up, to start applying them in other organizations, and kind of arrive at templates or frameworks that could be used more broadly. But there was very little time to sort of look ahead and say, okay, what does it actually take to properly govern algorithmic systems? What does it ask from organizations? So a lot of the longer term questions were left unaddressed, and we now see that we're now a year ahead, and these questions are still are more and more popping up. And so his work is the work that I'm listing here on this slide is really the insights from his empirical work, but now he's doing more conceptual work and more design-oriented work to see how we can help organizations make sense of all these different instruments and situate them in their organization and in their democratic processes. So a lot of the value here is in trying to sort of overcome the traditional gap between business and IT. We also see this a lot in the public context, that we think that technological systems can be, or technological problems that have a technological solution can be sort of captured in a set of requirements and then sort of given to the IT department or to an external market party. And what is becoming increasingly understood now is that that is too easy. And so at a sort of a higher level, the work that Sam is trying to do is to see, okay, how can we shape practices that bring the development of these systems into productive conversation with the democratic and administrative processes that are central and that are required to address the more normative and implications, normative design choices and implications of systems. And so that's some work on looking more with an institutional design lens. So that's a lot of the methods we're using there are leaning on institutional design. And then before I started here, I did some more work on the challenge of vagueness, which is the point that public values like safety or fairness are understood, formalized, and experienced differently by different people. And my insights that I've attained by working also with a philosopher on this is that we have to address vagueness through sociotechnical specification and validation. So that's the second part of this talk. But to introduce that work, just a short, and I forgot to say this in the beginning, if there's any questions also, maybe to keep it interactive. Before I go on in the second part, maybe this is actually a good time to just give you a little bit of an opportunity to ask questions about the first part, because I'm happy to keep it interactive. Any questions?
Okay, does anybody have any questions? I've got one, but
yeah, no, please. I think that makes it more also more fun for me. And
I wanted to ask you what you feel is on this number 3, the democratic institutions, what you feel is distinctly AI-ish about this, yeah? Because the child benefit scandal, for example, I mean, we had a very similar one here where Atos Origin were charged with deciding whether people were fit to work, yeah? And it deprived many people who were really quite disabled of the ability to get any state benefits and so on. And there's quite a literature about this kind of thing, about how digitalized systems produce, because of precisely what you've been talking about, produce misaligned incentives for public workers. And so you have things like back-end workers working to one set of KPIs and front-end workers working to a different set of KPIs that are actually in conflict. Yeah. And so I wondered what AI, what was the, and so if you like, there's a long history of this kind of stuff having happened pre the advent of deployment of machine learning. And what do you feel that machine learning adds to the issue here?
Yeah. Well, there's maybe a useful one thing that we did is to look at a really long range of what we call vulnerabilities. So these are sort of the things that may emerge in the sociotechnical context of a system. We didn't look a lot at the organizational lens, but I totally recognize what you're saying, that is a lot of that. These kinds of issues of misalignment are not sort of are more general and relate more to maybe to complex the ways that in which organizations are structured. But in the, maybe I can go there actually just briefly. It's a bit of it's a complex, actually I just put this together yesterday, so it's but what we did here was to say, okay, what are now, we listed 25 different vulnerabilities. So these are different types of biases, different types of things that can go wrong in the interaction between human and machine, things that change in the environment and that have an impact on the performance of the model or the application. And so I think there's this may be a useful way to get at your question, that there is before we start talking about machine learning systems and data-driven systems, let's assume that we have a set of requirements and rules that are maybe they're not fully clear yet, or fully aligned, but we are let's assume for now that in that world we sort of know what we want, and we can also sort of encode it in the way that some automation function is built. And then what machine learning adds here is maybe not everything is new, but like a lot of things here are new. So one of the problems of machine learning, for instance, is that it assumes that the data sources, the input variables of the model, as well as the output of the model, have a stable distribution. So in that case, the problem there is that assumption is already broken once you start implementing the model itself, because there's a sort of instant additional complexity here of people interpreting the model, people starting to have alternative ways of using the model, which is called adaptation. You see here at the top, there is ways in which potential subject of the system might start behaving differently. These are not necessarily different, like these forms of this might also occur in non-learning contexts. But for instance, misinterpretation, I think, becomes bigger, because like a lot of these systems, even if they are simple machine learning models, they don't rest on sort of causal or formally negotiated sort of rules and insights. So like part of our work is trying to sort of map this a little bit more holistically, but I don't have a sort of let me take a step back, see if there's anything else that comes to mind. Do you have any?
I don't particularly want to go down this. I've sent you off on a rabbit hole, and I think probably the rest of the audience are just want you to get on with the presentation. I mean, I'd really like to talk to you about this sometime, yeah, and that would be helpful, yeah, for me anyway. But maybe it's better if you just keep going on the main drive, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting rabbit hole, to be honest, because I think in many ways, I think a lot of organizations often don't before they start applying a machine learning model, they don't even fully understand what the problem is, like what the risks are. So I don't have a lot of sort of experience like pre-machine learning, but my sense is some of those issues already existed. There was already a sort of techno-solutionistic way of like adopting other digital technologies that have led to probably similar kinds of misalignment, maybe similar kinds of vulnerabilities have emerged through that. So that's it's a bit of it. I think machine learning just adds more complexity, and I think one thing maybe to then answer this and step out of the rabbit hole is that if you look at this through a system safety lens, by starting to add more complexity in the form of machine learning models, we also run into what's called the curse of flexibility. There's also one of the lessons in this historical paper that I mentioned before, which basically means that through programming and through like more and more flexible ways of designing digital solutions like machine learning applications, we sort of sometimes believe, and sometimes we are also released from the constraints that we used to have, especially in engineering, the natural constraints of material strength or of space or of other kinds of constraints, and instead we're running into the limits of cognitive capabilities. And so we actually know a lot about what can go wrong in a safety critical context where, let's say, a pilot relies on an autopilot, and we know there that it is important to reduce complexity in a way. So I think it's not a very optimistic sort of answer to your question, but I believe that I think a lot of machine learning solutions in practice, some of them, if they really sort of add new capabilities that are that can be brought into a context where it doesn't lead to sort of new issues of accountability. For instance, if a doctor starts relying on let's say, in a very, very good skin cancer detector, and it can also look at the image, right? It can sort of really double check what the system has brought to him or her. Then it has probably a natural, it integrates naturally, and it doesn't sort of address the added complexity doesn't really ask much more from the doctor in terms of cognitive capabilities. But once we start to look, for instance, at the public services context, there because the data, and we see this in this picture as well, because the data registries bringing data from all kinds of different organizations, different governmental organizations. If something changes in one, let's say in the life of a citizen, or let's say if something changes in one organization and the organization tries to sort of build, it doesn't have to be machine learning, but like it tries to build a decision-making scheme that is automated to fulfill the services to the citizens in a sort of locally optimal way. It might still be that through changes in the outputs of the system might still be fed back into data registries and then impact other algorithmic systems or other services in other contexts that might still harm the citizens. That's one of the that's one form of the curse of flexibility. That again, it's not necessarily tied to machine learning, but the complexity of machine learning just increases this issue. All right.
Okay, so maybe you can go back now. I mean, what you just said really reminded me of Charles Perrow's stuff on normal accidents. Looking at how the registries increase coupling, and in a complex setting. Yeah, so you do have these things where, if you like, there are difficult to understand error situations. I mean, that's way back in the history of safety systems. But anyway,
absolutely.
So
yeah.
Let's get on with being a bit vague here. Okay, so thanks.
Let's see. Oh, I have to press. And then, so let's go into vagueness directly. So what we did here was, what we saw was that there were very different responses to the question, okay, what does safety mean in the context of an AI system? And we drew inspiration from philosophy, in this case from Ruth Chang, philosopher at Oxford. And she used the Sorites paradox, which is the question here is like, if I keep taking away grains of sand from this heap, at what point does this heap turn into something that's not a heap anymore? So what constitutes a heap? And what was very useful in this sort of more analytical approach to vagueness, understanding vagueness, of how different people deal with vagueness, is or these canonical ways of addressing some situation of vagueness like this. So there are three of them here. The first is that there exists an objective answer for what is a heap. The second is different answers exist as different people use the word heap differently. And three is that there is no answer, as what entails a heap is intrinsically vague. And so what this is the paper Hard Choices. I think it might have also been listed in the invitation. So yeah, you can also start bringing this kind of thinking, or these kinds of thinking, to questions of fairness or questions of safety in AI systems. So in this particular case, this is a self-driving car that is approaching an intersection, or maybe it's already on the intersection. The traffic lights are either red or yellow or orange. And so this is a hazardous situation. And what we see also in the self-driving car, say, market, is that there have been very different approaches to understanding how to encode safety into these systems. So for instance, just to give you an idea or an example, Tesla has been very much focused on trying to integrate safety more in the sensing and in the environment of the car, whereas other people have really other companies have focused much more on building really rich maps. Obviously, there's a lot of vagueness and a lot of sort of choices to be made in how you label different, not just different objects or different people, but also the dynamics of these objects, and the way that you would predict the way that you predict how these objects will move in the next few seconds or milliseconds. So we've seen vagueness at large display in the self-driving car community, and it's still ongoing. And so this way of thinking has helped. And the central idea here is that we wanted to create more space for what we call normative indeterminacy, which basically means that there are many situations where we don't really know what the norms are. And a sort of dominant response has been to sort of use the first way of thinking, that there exists an objective answer for what is heap within the AI system. The AI communities, especially the technical AI communities, have been very focused on, there is a norm somewhere. We agree, or we can agree on what is safe. We just need to collect more data. We need to maybe simulate these situations long enough. We need to build more complex models, et cetera, et cetera. And so this work was really trying to say, no, these norms may not be clear, and actually you cannot discover them or encode social norms into a system, because you're also making them by choosing the practical conditions under which the AI tools are developed and of course deployed. And so how do you think about these hard choices? How do you elicit them? And like I said, this work is from a couple years ago, and as I moved to Delft, I started to sort of take this insight, which is basically also about emergence, right? So norms sort of emerge and they are being reshaped by AI systems, and that requires deliberation about the politics of development. So we really need to politicize AI system development, and also the context of deployment. And that requires cybernetic practices. So that's something that the paper talks about and proposes different forms of what we call different channels for dissent, different ways in which throughout these typical activities of designing or featureizing AI systems, optimizing or dealing with data, trying to validate or verify properties of the system, and eventually integrating the system, there are many moments where it is unclear what the norms are, or there are actually new behaviors of the system that may lead to emerging issues, emerging debates or conflicts at the level of norms or values. And as a result, we really need to sort of take that, assume that to happen, and have channels to go back to either specifying the system or updating the design of a system. Yeah, so I wanted to give just a short example of how the kind of research we've done as a result. So we did, with a master's student, we started looking at what's called the ML ops practices. These are this is a practice in software companies that work on machine learning, and it's a derivation of DevOps, of the DevOps practice, which is basically combining development and operations in software. Because there's often lots of updates in software, so there's a need for what they call continuous development and continuous integration. And this is the rough, a very high level sort of depiction of that process, where you have some area where you're experimenting, where you may be retraining or redesigning a system. And then there's ways to integrate or to deploy updated software and then to use it in operations. And Deploy here has been a partner in this research, which is a startup company that is developing the infrastructure to do this kind of work. So this is more the infrastructure that makes it easier for companies or organizations to deploy their machine learning models, but also to monitor them and to sort of detect when they might need to update or redesign these systems. And this company was also aware that even though this is already, I think this is an important function, that there was something missing. So what we did was we started doing empirical work to map in a little bit more detail what are the typical activities of this ML ops approach, or this ML lifecycle, you could call it. And so I won't go into the details here, just in interest of time. So that's what we did first, and we analyzed that through both sort of the insights that I've discussed before, so the sort of the normative complexity of machine learning systems. We also did this literature review where we looked at all the different vulnerabilities that are more sociotechnical in nature, so thinking about interpretation, about adaptation, and all these other aspects, some of them which I just discussed, to sort of see, like, okay, what can we expect from an ML ops practice like this, and what might be missing? And so Anouk's thesis was really an excellent work, where we ended up proposing a socio-technical paradigm for ML ops, concluding that the current ML ops paradigm is relevant but very technical. It's really centered around technical metrics for measuring what sort of the outputs of ML machine learning models do and how those change, but they do not yet facilitate the social and normative dynamics and context in which these systems operate, and that these systems also reshape. And so socio-technical specification was sort of the central contribution here, and that was we translated that to a set of guidelines where we used different case studies to first sort of corroborate our insights in terms of how this way of working, the current way of working, was limited, and what the sort of core challenges were. And then we combined that with lessons from system safety, from systems engineering more broadly, and from like a more ethical deliberation and normative deliberation. So again, like this is we just submitted a paper based on this thesis, and I try to build try to visualize the categories of vulnerabilities, what we call them dimensions, which are here the green icons. So I think if you look at this long enough and you know a bit about machine learning, you will probably agree with most of it. But I'm also really curious what the reviewers of the will say when they see this, because it's very hard to not let complexity explode. But anyways, here we try to go from a typical, linear sort of idea of we have data and models, and maybe there's some bias there. We just need to make sure that it's that we either limit it or otherwise that we minimize it, or otherwise take care of remaining bias. To say, okay, actually, how does bias emerge? It emerges both pre-existingly in data, but also in the social practices where data is gathered. It can emerge in technical bias, in how you build a system, the kinds of choices you make, and it also emerges in practice when you're actually using a system, when you might be misinterpreting an output. There's an example here is disparate interactions, which is a great paper by Ben Green, former colleague, who showed that even if a machine learning model is right, it can still lead to civil servants interpreting it in a way to sort of to confirm their own biases, basically, and to sort of it's what's called disparate interactions, where if you look at the system in use, the biases actually, even though you're trying to lower them in the model itself, they can still increase in the use of it through misinterpretation. And so what we did here, again, we listed a lot of these recent insights around machine learning together with the older lessons around vulnerabilities and sources of hazards. And we try to sort of, because it's such a long list, we try to say, okay, what are the dimensions that you have to start thinking about when you're designing a system, when you're thinking about governing a system? And we see that these terms, accountability, misinterpretation, a more dynamic, broader view on bias and error, the downstream impacts that emerge through the coupling of data-driven systems, it's really helpful. It's really helpful for developers, but it's also been helpful for the civil advocacy organizations and auditors that we spoke with, that are really struggling at the moment, because there's so much literature, there's so many different issues that pop up. But like, how does it connect with the sort of sociotechnical fabric of actual operating processes in which these systems are used, and the actual outcomes? And so we're not there yet, I think, but this work is trying to sort of make it a little bit more digestible and conceptual to work towards new practices for designing and governing these systems. So I think we've come already close to the end of the hour. The guidelines are they're in the thesis by Anouk Wolters, and this is how the picture looks like. The guidelines are not just about adding sociotechnical specification; they're also addressing existing aspects of integration of operations and experimenting or actually developing the system. So it is a bit more of a holistic approach, not addressing everything, but addressing the practices of design and governance from day to day. So that's like we've sort of arrived at the end.
Can I ask you one question about this? This is very fast, and you can just say yes or no. In looking at that kind of revised approach, have you considered the linkage to other kind of design methodologies? I mean, specifically here, I'm thinking about things like value-sensitive design, because I mean, it takes in quite a lot of what you've been saying, and also it looks at let's say, how the institutional framing of these things has an influence on the way that you construct systems. I mean, and I think the VSD guys have been looking quite a bit at what they do about AI. So I just wondered if you looked at much linkage between those two kind of areas of work.
Yeah, that's the yes or no. But it is definitely one of my PhD students has started from that perspective. So value sensitive design is also, like, here in Europe, actually Delft is a main hub for it. And Batja Friedman is, I think, even has an honorary degree here. So we've had lots of interaction with that community over the years and the decades now. What I see with the mostly ethicists and philosophers that are working on this is that they're also aware of these institutional elements, and what our work, our lens, especially the systems and also the control lens, brings is that it helps to map the complexities of these systems, which seems to be a bit more of a prerequisite for then thinking about, like, designing and eventually also the institutional design. And that's sort of captured here at the bottom of the slide, is that if we do a better job at understanding these emergent values as emergent properties, if we try to map them, and if we can sort of agree on how things work now, then and then, you know, then we can have a more informed discussion and deliberation about what the role of AI is, what the implications are, and what it really means for norms and values. So I think there is a nice sort of synergy emerging also between our work and that of people working in value sensitive design.
Okay, I'm just thinking we're nearly at the top of the hour. So I mean, this seems like, I mean, you've got the complete picture now, but maybe we haven't had much about one. But yeah, but maybe now is the time just to open things up to any other questions that people have. Yeah, and because I think people start to drop off because it's getting close to 3. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay?
Sounds good. Yeah.
Good. Okay. So, anybody got any questions? Silence.
Okay, I guess I'll ask oh, I see you with hand.
Oh, okay. So where's the hand?
Naham?
That's, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I just my camera on. How are you doing? Hi, Roel. Thanks. This is really interesting. I suppose I had a really practical question, which I'm curious to know your thoughts about. So, you know, in practice, developing what you've called sociotechnical specifications as part of the design process sounds right and the way to go. I'm just curious to know, actually, what's the entry point for that? How receptive are developers or governments that may be, you know, in the process of using developers or contracting developers? I mean, do you have a sense that there's actually a possibility by which a kind of mapping of the socio-technical norms, as it were, can actually be integrated with the design process that could be, you know, very much contained within a commercial or a government framework?
Yeah, I think I have a sort of ambivalent response. I think on the one hand, we do see that over the last, well, I think over the last 10 years, we've seen more and more roles in organizations that are a role of translator. These people were sort of often brought in because somehow different parts of the organization are not able to sort of speak each other language. And so I think now we see more and more that turns more into that these kinds of roles become more institutionalized. So that, I think, really this kind of work should really also help. And I actually even have some of my PhD students have come work with me because they feel like, okay, I have a technical training, and then I've worked, for instance, as a consultant or as a sort of product manager, but now I really want to sort of go back to research and see how I can bridge these or turn my sort of translation expertise into something that is has more method to it, has more sort of predictability to it, rather than it being a sort of messy practice. So I think that there's more and more of those kinds of people, and also acknowledgement of that more institutionally. On the other hand, our research also shows that, a lot of the sociotechnical systems thinking and design, it's been around for a long time, but somehow it hasn't really taken root in many organizations. And now I'm leaning mostly on the work we do in the public sector. So part of our research now also goes into like, why is that? And like, what are the barriers there? Why is it that, of course, there are things that are specific to machine learning, but as you already saw in my response to the earlier question, like it's not, most of these issues have been around in slightly different forms before, but we somehow haven't been able to address them in or to sort of let this kind of thinking and kind of design practice land in organizations. So yeah, so I think that's more or less how I look at that. But curious, what do you think? I don't know if I think we're at time, so maybe let's see what if there's other questions too. But
people are beginning to drop off. Yeah. So
yeah.
So I think you're muted. Yeah. If you want to respond.
Yeah, I'm curious because so. I mean, I've been running some workshops in the last couple of years in which have involved designers in the public sector in sort of sensitive areas like digital welfare and border control. And I have to say it's very opaque, actually. I mean, we did get participation from some of the relevant technicians, but also some of the relevant policymakers. But it's very clear that those processes are controlled very tightly internally. So the extent to which you could have greater transparency in the way in which the norms are specified. I mean, I think the historical practice of something like digital welfare here in the UK has been that there's been some sort of commitment to user-oriented design, but user-oriented design has not resulted necessarily in results that are necessarily either lawful or particularly user-friendly. So despite all of the talk about digital government and that whole movement that seemed to be quite influential here in the UK, it doesn't seem to have aligned at all with basic things like human rights or even, I think, administrative law. So to me, it's begging the question about actually what you need to do, what kind of frameworks do you need to establish in order to shift from a technical to a socio-technical perspective, where the values actually kind of not entirely open for contestation, right? Some of these are already mandated.
Yeah. I mean, there are some promising developments here in the Netherlands where, you have algorithmic registers, you have new governance approaches that really take case studies into not just an ethical committee, but even like a sort of like deliberative space where different actors, whether they are like customers or citizens or workers, all reflect. There's potential there, but at the same time, you see a sort of response to that, like, okay, what algorithms should go into the register and what not, right? So there's this sort of typical response by for different applications or for what you could also say forms of power that want to stay like sort of out of the lens of accountability. So I'm very much also I don't want to be skeptical. So I do see that there are new structures being built, but we will have to see how effective they will be and how sort of ubiquitously or like sort of comprehensively applied or adopted they will be in the end.
Thanks very much.
Okay, so I think we should close out now. So thanks very much to Roel, and maybe the traditional round of applause might be appropriate at this particular point. So thanks very much, very interesting, and I look forward to seeing where this goes. That's great. Thank you.
Oh, as my oops, I didn't realize that my camera was off. Oops.
Yeah, no, I was